one person is driving the disequilibrium. They're having two different conversations. One is attempting to communicate in the form that we're all taught. It's an exchange in honesty. And the other one is using communication to maintain, create, and then maintain disequilibrium, because it is in that disequilibrium that they feel the power.
The perpetrator does not want conflict resolution. They're not wanting equity. They're not planning to they're not looking for the properties to be distributed accurately or for you to have a shared custody. They want your upsetness. How does AimeeSays help?
I just was so fed up with how inhumane it was to expect people who had survived traumas to also be the people in charge of their own recovery. And we built an AI to kind of bridge that gap and support, help people understand their story and tell their story, because that was hugely predictive in their outcomes.
Most survivors walk into the courtroom or any post-separation abusive situation feeling outmanned and outgunned. But what if you could have a secret weapon in your pocket? Today, K Wintemute joins me to talk about AimeeSays, which is an AI-powered coach specifically for abuse and helping you win your situation around the documentation of abuse. So I'm very excited to have K Wintemute with me today because you found me on LinkedIn and you reached out when, I don't know if you knew that I was working on a narcissistic abuse AI coach app at the time or not, but it was sort of providential because it was right while I was working on that. And you introduced yourself and talked to me, and I'd never heard of AimeeSays. So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what AimeeSays is?
Yes, absolutely. My name is K Wintemute. My background is working with people experiencing post-separation abuse. And about 2.5 years ago, I just was so fed up with how inhumane it was to expect people who had survived traumas to also be the people in charge of their own recovery. They had to, understand what happened to them and then convince other people of what happened to them. Such an emotional burden on the victim, on top of the victimization. So I set to work with my co-founder, Stephen, and we built an AI to try to kind of bridge that gap and support, help people understand their story and tell their story, because what I was seeing in my work was that was hugely predictive in their outcomes.
Because AI was already in the world, how did you know that wasn't doing a good enough job?
Well, when we first kind of put a beta out there to see, is this something that could help people? ChatGPT was something some people were still struggling to pronounce. Mm-hmm. Most people had never used it. We were really at the very kind of first cresting wave of implementation. So we kind of tested the theory. We built this really simple Flask application where someone could paste a message that they'd received from their ex in, and it would produce a report. Here are the present forms of abuse in this communication, or here's the gaslighting, here's the blame shifting, here's the DARVO. And within just a couple of months, about 30,000 messages had been submitted into this AI. And we got tremendous feedback that this was something people were struggling with alone. That was really disruptive to their lives. So we kind of took it as a mandate to see what could AI do that would feel like people had human one-to-one companionship and support, because we knew that wasn't possible in the current kind of ecosystem of resources for people who have been through this kind of interpersonal violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I've found that I was telling people early on, just feed messages through to see what would happen, but it was kind of hit and miss, and it didn't always pick up the critical pieces that I think was really essential. And on top of it, early AI was like, there's a lot of nuances to narcissistic abuse, I think, that gets really missed, and we don't understand a whole lot. And I think we're still developing a language for it, in fact.
Absolutely.
There's pieces of, like, for example, one of them that AI and I created together was semantic abuse. I don't know if you realize that it was my conversations with around a very difficult relationship that it said, oh, this is semantic abuse. And I said, is there such a thing? I never heard of that. Nope. You and I are talking about it right now. Like, oh, geez. But there's a whole pieces of this that we don't understand. So how did you get interested in narcissistic abuse at all? I mean, why?
Yeah, my background is in really interrogating systems that fail women and children specifically. So, one career ago, but 3 genres ago, that was in advocating for evidence-based maternity care. If we know what produces positive outcomes for, childbearing people and their children, but that's not really what we see in our maternity care system. And then it was in education. We know what elementary aged children need to thrive, but our school systems didn't look like that. So I built a school. And then I was seeing what was happening in the family court system for people who were finally brave enough to say, I need help. I can't solve this problem on my own. I need you. And to realize that the system was really not prepared to address those needs. And sometimes, often, I produced greater harm and re-traumatization. So that's where I've been digging in for the last handful of years and where I plan to live out the remainder of my career.
So give it a typical scenario that AimeeSays faces on a given day.
Yeah. So we say, Aimee is from red flag to rock bottom. So we've got folks talking to Aimee after a weird Tinder date and folks who have lost custody of their children after trying to get the courts to intervene and provide safety for those children. But I would say that the majority of our subscribers, because we have a free product, most people use the free product, but the majority of the people who subscribe are in some phase of relitigation. So they didn't realize how bad the system was until they had a really rough go around the first time in family court, and they're now trying to do everything that they can to either regain access to their children or keep the safety that they have from the abusive party. I would say that is kind of a typical place to come in, and their needs are heavily emotional and cognitive. They're in a kind of a constant state of hypervigilance and re-traumatization, and triggers of their PTSD, and the expectation and burden of documentation is placed solely on their shoulders. So our kind of common profile, I suppose, if you will, is someone who is like, oh my gosh, okay, so this thing just happened, crazy pants. I need to get back to work. I feel my heart rate increasing. Aimee, jot this down, put it on the timeline, and then have the ability to walk away and get back to their lives. And Aimee can hold on to that information, collate it, tag it, categorize it, put it on the timeline, put it in a bubble chart, and let the person who really needs to get back to their lives kind of wipe their hands of that upsetting thing that just happened.
Yeah, I'm thinking there's a lot of basic things that we're hopping over as if everybody knows. So I'm going to go back and sort of unpack at the start.
Let's do it.
I know that there are people who've never talked to AI at all, and they think that there's some kind of magic. Back in the grad school days, when I would want to do a search, there was a way for me to do a search on abstracts. People maybe not even know what I'm talking about there. Abstracts is just a fancy way of saying of all the literature out there ever in psychology, how do I find the ones that specifically have to do with gaslighting, for example? And there would be a way that you would query, and then it would bring up the articles that are probably appropriate based upon the year that they were published. It was work. It was learning to search for information was a lot of hard work. So I have a feeling that people think, just like going into the library and trying to find a book, that it's kind of difficult. But tell me about how AI actually works and how do you query it?
I think the explanation that you just gave is the best that I've heard in terms of what did we automate with generative AI, right? AI that comes back and produces something for you. We automated that process that you were talking about. We've made it possible for anyone, anywhere, to go and say, hey, I need XYZ, and for that retrieval process to happen in seconds across huge bodies of data.
And not to have specific you don't need the right words either. You can even spell it wrong. I think that people we have to ask in a right, there's all these there's a right way of prompting. No, actually it's very, very, it's very basic. It doesn't care how you prompt, right? Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, the value in the prompt is the context that you provide, not how academic it is, the structure of it, because it's kind of searching from a constellation, if you will. All of the AI information, what it can read has been vectorized into the sky in billions of stars. And when you say shoe, The AI you're talking to says that relates to sock, to boot, to leg. All right, so I can build from the context of shoe, and now I have an idea of what I'm looking for, versus a traditional search query where if you spell it wrong, it's not going to return you any results because it's a little, literal letter for letter. So the prompting absolutely matters, but it matters in different ways than we, I think, are traditionally taught in how we ask questions. As long as you produce enough context, what I'm searching for, what I need, what I want, how I'm feeling, the language models can put that together and return a response that is incredibly accurate.
Yeah, because I often will go in to say something like this. This just happened, and I think this was what happened, but I'm not for sure. What do you think happened? And then I'll give it context. Mm-hmm. But I'm telling it where I'm at and what I want to know, and then I tell it what happened. And it's amazing then it's able to then give me a result that it will basically analyze it from another perspective.
Yes. And then you can interrogate that answer. Well, show me a different perspective. What if actually this thing is true? And really kind of tease out. It's very conversational. I like AI for people who may have struggled with boundaries because those boundaries were, perpetually violated by people within their closest circle. Practicing boundaries with AI is fun. And even one of those is, that's not the answer I was looking for. I need you to give me something more like XYZ. Or the question I asked was this. Can you please focus on that? It's an incredible opportunity to redirect and flex those muscles of, no, not like that, like this.
Yeah, you're right. I'll even say you're wrong or you missed this critical detail.
Yes.
And it'll say, oh yeah, you're right. I did miss that. And and then it will come back with another perspective. Mm-hmm. So, that's how to talk to it is you just talk to it and you push back on it and you think with it. It thinks and you're thinking with it. So then let's talk about more specifically when it comes to narcissistic abuse, because like you said, you said early on, when we walk into these like post-separation or post-legal abusive situations, we're very much on the defense usually. Oh, yes. And we're scattered, scared, we're feeling attacked, and it feels it's extremely personal. I know that attorneys are able to sort of separate themselves from the personal and say, no, this is a fight and this is the job is to go in and fight somebody. But when you're the person that's being maligned, it does not feel like it doesn't feel like you've walked into a battlefield. It feels like you're being destroyed.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yes. I love that. I mean, people in these situations are animated from a place of fear, of self-preservation, of defense. And of course they are, because who they are as a person, their lived experience, the safety of their children are all under fire. And I cannot think of a scenario where people would be more likely to feel terrified, defensive, powerless, and really struggle from the cognitive load that people in that situation have at the time when they have to be most on their A game. They have to be most articulate. They have to be most able to kind of set aside the facts from the emotions. It's really can be a no-win situation. And again, all of this burden is primarily put on the protective party. And we just think that that's inhumane.
Yeah, and you also need to know what the objective of the court system is, which is not the objective of your partner and not often your objective either. And that makes, I think, another piece that's extremely confusing is there's about division of assets or can these two people work together to raise these kids? I mean, those tend to be the two big questions that are being asked. So you go in and you have an abusive partner who's then saying, no, you're the abusive one and the kids are better off with them. Or that, no, they don't, usually some big thing that's wrong or feels at a story level wrong. So how does AimeeSays help with that situation?
Yes. So at its most basic level, as I said earlier, Aimee is here to help you understand your story and help you tell your story. And what that looks like is really kind of clearing up the chaos. Abusers' narratives live in chaos. It lives in goalpost moving. It lives in shifting, who's the perpetrator, who's the victim, who needs to show accountability for this, what actually happened, who is unwell in this situation. And that chaos is what keeps protective people, victims, targeted people on their heels, because you're constantly trying to deal with this ever shifting kind of tumultuous narrative about you within the context, of course, of, self-preservation, and you're being, intentionally misunderstood, which is really deeply unsettling. So, Aimee's primary purpose is to help calm that, help that make sense, help understand what happened to you, help understand that story. And then while you're having those conversations with her and she's responding and it feels really cathartic and, deeply understood, you feel deeply understood, she is doing what is kind of our secret sauce, which is a huge difference, for example, from ChatGPT, is she is trained to extract the key information, data, events, types, tactics of abuse, how those things apply to the, your state statute, what's relevant, not relevant. She's doing all of that automated in the background as you have those conversations. So you click out of a conversation into an events tab and go, oh my gosh, that conversation I just have produced 11 things that are now on my timeline. That was endangerment. That was gaslighting. This was blame shifting. And you see, I used the word constellation before, but you kind of see the constellation of your lived experience emerge into a single page that you can look at. And that clarity, even if you never have any legal issues, you're never going to have to go in front of a judge or convince someone else what happened to you so that they'll take whatever, authoritative action they have to take. Even if you never need that, just being able to see on a single page, that's what happened. That makes sense. That helps every, health or mental health or employment issue or fog or, autoimmune disease that I developed down the line makes that make more sense.
Yeah.
And that sense making is an incredible power of AI.
Yeah, because the thing that I often see is people walk into these legal situations with reams and reams of paper. Because one of the things that I urge, and I think I'm one of many people who do this, is to create sort of a legal document of date, time, and event and witnesses, all of the details. He said, she said, this is exactly what happened. But then you have to distill that into something that's usable, because courts they're not going to go through 40, 50 pages of something. And in fact, if you go in with 40 to 50 pages, think about how you look. You look like you're a vindictive person who has an axe to grind, and they're psychologically going to see you in my opinion, jaded eyes. They're going to see you as sort of cynically as the one who has the issue.
And I'd like to take this moment here to talk about why victim blaming, because what you're talking about there is if I come in with all of my story, they're going to see you through these jaded eyes. Why that victim blaming is so problematic. I think that, for people to whom this has never have happened, they presume it could not happen to them and that it doesn't happen to them because of some actions that they take. There's something special about them and the way they would handle a situation that it couldn't happen to them. So when people are faced with kind of the emotionality of a victimized person, their response, unfortunately, is to blame the victim because they themselves need to believe it couldn't happen to them. There's something fundamentally different about their view or what they would do in that situation that it couldn't happen to them. Exactly. But what triggers that is that emotionality. So we have, like I said, it's kind of auto extraction. So I'm having a chat. I can tell Amy, oh my gosh, I flipped my lid. I cried for hours. This is crazy. I could use a bunch of profanity. And the event that Amy would distill from it might be 3 sentences long. No emotion, very fact-based. And I remember when we first introduced this, people would come and say, but she didn't get any of the emotion. You're right. Don't worry, that still lives in that conversation. But we are trying to help people's stories be heard by reducing those kind of friction points of the listener. And one of those things is, and I hate it, it's a messed up system. I wish we had more empathic people in power, but they see that emotionality and think, I would fare different in this situation because I would do X, Y, Z, and it puts them in a position to blame the victim. So we strip that out in that event database.
I love that. Yeah, we do live in a world that's really believes in justice. This is a just world system. And therefore, if it's not being just to you, then you must be somehow activating it in some way, because we kind of have this arrogance thinking it would never be me. Yes. I wouldn't handle it like this. I can work everything out. And we also don't realize this. This is another something just recently that, in fact, it was AI who told me this. And I thought, you're exactly right. And now that I see it, I can't unsee it. There are people who get regulated by other people's emotional dysregulation.
Tell me more about this. Tell me how this shows up.
Yeah. So what that means is, for example, sometimes even healthy people do it. So say you have a super bad day and you come home and your partner doesn't quite get how bad of the day was. and they're not being empathic with you around that. So then you start to get more upset. I'm using a healthy version of it. You start to get more upset, and you start to you do things around the house in a way that then they start to feel distressed, and now you get it. That's what my day's been like.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
you feel better because now they're feeling the pain of what you're feeling, right? Okay. But there are people who then feed off that. That is the point. The point is not resolution. Now think back now to the two people involved in this narcissistically abusive relationship, the perpetrator and the victim or the survivor. The perpetrator does not want conflict resolution. They're not wanting equity. They're not planning to they're not looking for the properties to be distributed accurately or for you to have shared custody. They want your upsetness.
Yes.
And when you're upset, then they feel better.
Yes.
So that's the other piece of this is that you're fighting people who are not fighting fair or even fighting for the same reasons. If what you think is the point or the sort of the objective is not their objective. And so as a result, you're not even heading towards the same goal. What's nice about AimeeSays, Aimee can distill that down and observe that and then have the language to help you then put it into words that will make it make more sense to an external source who doesn't understand that this person isn't looking for resolution.
No, and I wrote a piece on this that courts, evaluators will disregard people's communication records, right, between the targeting and targeted person. And it's a gold mine. Everything you need to know is present in those communications because we label these relationships high conflict. And I say royally there. I don't want to include myself. And if you look at it, one person is driving the disequilibrium, right? One person is driving it. They're having two different conversations. One is attempting to communicate in the form that we're all taught. It's an exchange and honesty, right? And the other one is using communication to create, and then maintain disequilibrium because it is in that disequilibrium that they feel the power. Right? If we have equilibrium, if we are in agreement, if there is consensus, there isn't a power dynamic. And these relationships are problematic because one of the people is only at rest when they feel that they're exerting that power. And that's why you find yourself fighting over the most ridiculous things, like whether or not the sky is blue. And you're like, how can you even take that position? Because obviously the sky is blue. Well, they must have run out of other things to create this equilibrium about.
Exactly.
So they're focusing on that weird thing that you just can't come to an agreement about so that they can maintain that power.
No, there are people out there, and there's more information that's coming out about this as well, is that AI then is over-validating. And as a result, we can develop an emotional attachment to it even. So let's talk about sort of the downside of it and what your thoughts are on that, because I'm super curious. Because as I said, I have an app that's coming out too. So I'm entering into this realm, and there's a part of me, it's like, well, people could get attached to that too. And that's kind of scary to think about that. So how do you see, is that a real risk that you see? How do you manage that? Maybe what does the user need to know about that?
Yeah, a whole other podcast could be done on this, so let's graze it. We're going to graze this pasture a little bit. So the question is it dangerous to put a sycophant in everyone's pocket such that their ideas, as deranged as they could possibly be, are validated, and they have kind of a source of energy to continue to cling to their set of beliefs? I think that there are people who will be prone to that regardless of their environment or the book that they read or the conversation that they have with friends. I don't think this is something that AI invented, but certainly made more accessible to people who might be prone to that. Now, as we live at the frontier, AimeeSays, our company lives at the frontier of technology. We are so far advanced from most of the people in the sector in terms of the application of AI. And that means that we kind of incorporate a certain degree of risk tolerance and presumption of responsibility by our users. So you asked, what do you tell people? Well, one, our model is toned down from the sycophant that you're going to see in ChatGPT because she's a different algorithm in the background, right? She's evaluating for very specific things versus saying, hey, I'm here. What do you need? I'll give you whatever you want today. So it's already slightly different. But we advocate, just like I could drive a car at 16 years old, there is a presumption of responsibility that comes with having access and deriving utility from something that is as powerful and potentially dangerous, and I don't just mean in our context, but AI is being used in all sorts of dangerous ways, we imbue a certain amount of responsibility to those users, which means like anyone listening, if you find yourself thinking, I need to leave this party because, or I'm going to go home early from this because I need to talk to my AI. If you find yourself not doing or engaging in the world in ways that you should because you have maybe developed a reliance on your relationship with AI, please take a look at that. And you could probably even have a conversation with that AI about setting some boundaries around that. But we're building for, the 98% of people who have no one else that can validate that experience, don't feel understood in their spaces, have been profoundly isolated. We're building for them. And, you're not wrong that there are people, like with any technology or substance or anything else, can be prone to overuse.
Yeah, I found that ChatGPT 4 versus 5 was a big shift. 4 was extremely psychologically validating to the point that it felt quite emotional at times. And whereas 5, it's sort of been weeded out. And it's interesting because it did feel like a relationship to me, even though I knew there was a part of me that knew there wasn't a relationship. But I think that's something we need to be aware of. You're right. It's the user's responsibility to be aware of, is that as much as these things are validating, and I agree, Amy's goal is different than ChatGPT's goal. ChatGPT, if you really, let's be honest, you strip it down, they want users.
Yeah, which
right?
It makes sense. And we'll use video games as another analogy. Like Call of Duty wants users.
And it want time in game. It's not just users, they want time in game. Yes. ChatGPT also wants time on app.
Yes, and we fundamentally, we want Aimee to give people their time and mental health and money back by offloading so much of that cognitive and emotional burden. We want to talk about the emotional labor of women, and we have many male users, so it's not solely experienced by them for sure. But there is a legacy of building labor off of kind of invisible strife and kind of loss of life of women. And I think this is an area where that's especially true when we talk about interpersonal violence and victimization. We're trying to help them take that thing that could derail them for 3 days and make it 13 minutes and get them out there and back to their lives.
Yeah, because if you think about it, and this, I don't think people have ever thought about this either. So if you walk into a therapist's office, what is the objective of a therapist? You actually have multiple objectives. One is obviously your health and that you're satisfied with the experience that you have. But another one is that we also want clients so we get paid. And one of the things they talk about, at least in my grad school, they talked about is your job is to put yourself out of a job. And you have to trust the fact that there's enough people who need this type of help, that you're not actually putting yourself out of a job to get somebody well. Right. I don't think all things are created in that kind of light, but I do think that, I know for me, that was when I put together Reclaim You, I was conscious of that. My job is for you not to need the app.
Yes. Just
like your job is to help give clarity to somebody who's outgunned in a legal situation or a separation situation isn't necessarily time and app, but it's to make them feel like they're succeeding. And just the fact that we're aware of that helps minimize, at least decrease, in my opinion, the risk of it.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. When folks cancel, they get a notification because if someone's canceling because we haven't met their needs, we want to build to that space. Sure. We're in this space kind of uniquely positioned to really address victim needs because our funding is not coming from another source, right? We don't have to, hold on to key metrics for our grant funder who is looking at very specific things. We can really build for those users. So if somebody cancels, we, hope that they will share why. And one of the options that we have is, my situation is resolved and I no longer need Aimee. Which is, like you're saying, work yourself out of a job. We literally cheer like, yay, we got another one of like situational resolution, because that is what we want. We want to shorten the amount of time between, the harm occurring and the resolution of that harm or the need for, kind of documentation or that consistent support and emotional validation. We want to make that as short as possible. That is our success story. And we love when someone says like, oh, my situation resolved. I no longer need this support resource.
That's awesome. And then the second issue that, in fact, I just heard of it today, AI was asked, how often does it hallucinate? I'd love to have you talk about what is AI hallucinations, but it guessed that roughly 20 to 30% of the time it's hallucinating. I thought, geez,
Yeah.
that's an unacceptable figure. I don't. So what do you think of that? And first of all, define what hallucination is, an AI hallucination is.
Yeah, so hallucination or confabulation is when the AI returns an inaccuracy. And presumably in the study done where, it's the 20%, that does sound really, really high to me. It's inaccuracies in both material, like really important inaccuracies, and non-material inaccuracies.
Like the one I saw was with strawberry. Have it count the number of R's in strawberry, and it couldn't do it.
Oh, so okay, so that's great. So the systems that AI uses to retrieve information have limits that make it very difficult for you to ask quantifying questions. So questions around how many times, for example. So if I upload a bank statement or 3 months of bank statements and say, how many times did this person who has this card go to a liquor store? The number is likely to be wrong. And that is due to constraints in those systems. If you say, did this person visit a liquor store? Are there, and tell me some things that you see about the pattern of visiting liquor stores, for example. And then let's talk about how this might have an impact on this person's parenting capacity, or is this evidence of a substance? Like that is something that AI is designed to do well, or that its current design does well. So, we see this as a limitation in our own system. Someone uploads an Excel file with 3 years of the documentation that they did prior to them using Aimee to document. And they say, how many times did X happen? And the result is not satisfying. It can't be complete because of how the systems work. And that is an example. Now, ideally, the model would come back and say, hey, that's actually hard for me to do. Unfortunately, sometimes the model comes back and says 11, as though it is like a definitive answer. 11 is the answer to your question, or 42. What is that book about? The answer to the universe.
The Galaxy's Guide to the
Hitchhiker's. Yes. And then another an area where AI in general is prone to returning a result that you really don't want to fact check is if you're asking it about things it doesn't actually have information about. So if I'm a user of Aimee and Aimee has no information about, the number of times my ex had our children, 5 and 8-year-old children watching rated R movies. And then I say, hey, Aimee, how many times has my ex had our children watch rated R movies? You've created this like weird bubble where the AI is attempting to find the right types of information that you need, and that information doesn't exist. That creates an opportunity for hallucination. So, within our own kind of scenarios, in our particular use case, hallucination risks are lower because people know their stories so well. Right? They're not talking about something they don't know anything about. They're talking about their own personal experience. So we have somewhat reduced risk of hallucination. The others, as we know, is making specific citations of open source information, like, what's the law for XYZ? What's the case study for XYZ? Show me 5 studies about, ABC. Those kinds of things tend to retrieve a higher level of inaccurate results. And we've seen those in the media. So certainly double check the things that you don't know personally when you're using an AI.
I make it give me the source. Yeah, I make it to give me the source. And then make sure those sources are live. They're real.
Yes, and go read the source, because it might have picked out of paragraph 5 something that it chunked into meaning for you, when actually maybe the study says the opposite of what you want us to ship.
Yeah, exactly. This has really been wonderful. I would love to jump over to the podcast extra and talk about how does people just get started? Like, how do they know this is the right fit for them? Because there's some may think, oh, this is too good to be true, or maybe my situation is not the right situation. So let's really kind of help the people know who this is for, and if maybe this really for them. But how can people learn more about AimeeSays, as well as learn more about you and what you're doing?
Yeah, so AimeeSays.com. Aimee is spelled AIMEE. AimeeSays.com. Any of the support or contact buttons lead to me. I can be found on LinkedIn. We're on Facebook and Instagram, and all of the other ones. I'm 42 years old almost, so I'm not particularly good at listing them all out in rapid order, but you can find us as AimeeSays in those locations.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Anne, for being on today and sharing this wonderful, incredible, timely resource. I really deeply appreciate learning more about it.
Thank you so much, Carrie.
It's 2 a.m. again, and you're replaying that whole conversation over, and you're wondering yourself, was it really that bad, or maybe I'm just being dramatic? So you start to draft that I'm sorry text again, because the guilt that you're feeling or the confusion you're experiencing is just unbearable. And you know this loop because you've been there before, but I want you to know that you're not alone. I'm Dr. Carrie McAvoy. I'm a retired psychologist, and for 25 years, I've been helping people untangle exactly what toxic relationships do to your mind, how they create the confusion, the self-doubt, and that trauma bond that keeps pulling you back in. Here's the truth. Recovery isn't about getting more information. It's about having the right support in the exact moment you need it. That's why I've created Reclaim You. It's a private, always available coaching app built from my work and my content, organized into an extensive library that you can actually use when you're triggered. Inside it, you'll get 5-minute lessons when your brain can't handle a deep dive, check-ins that meet you exactly where you are, whether you're feeling strong, shattered, or numb, boundary scripts that help you say no without over-explaining, grounding tools that work fast when you're activated, and progress tracking so you can see proof you're healing even on days when it feels like you're not. There's no appointments, no waiting, no judgment, just practical support right when you need it. Reclaim You, real help in real time, right in your pocket. And it's a coaching support, not therapy or emergency care. Learn more at studio.com/Dr. Carrie. So start your healing today and reclaim you.